Welcome to Leningrad. Oh well, I'll call it St. Petersburg. So, I found some rather middling watermelon, but I'm in a lovely place called the Mikhailovsky Gardens. So they were built it was begun in the 1820s for the Grand Prince Mikhail Pavlovich. And it used to stretch a bit further back that way towards the Church of the Saviour, but now it's a good deal smaller. And yeah, it's just a lovely big public park that they have near the centre of Leningrad. And I was just reading very briefly about the history of it. In Soviet times, obviously it was made accessible to the public, and obviously still is. Now it's more of a heritage site. Like, you don't have to pay to come in; it's completely open to the public. You can wander about as you like, but I think it's more of a heritage site. So I'll come up to sort of the main area, and you'll see the Mikhailovsky Dvorets, which translates as the Mikhailovsky Palace or Castle, that kind of thing. And it's quite obviously done in sort of the English garden house style. You know, this is St. Petersburg. This was supposed to be sort of the European face of the empire, after Catherine the Great and Peter the Great and all the other reformers who wanted to bring Russia closer to Europe. So yes, this was just the gardens for Grand Prince Mikhail Pavlovich. I know nothing about the guy. Again, my period's more so the Soviet period, but yeah, just a very pretty, very nice garden. There's the house again. I'll get a better shot in a minute. To their credit, the reform-minded Tsars did kind of pull it off. I mean, this is obviously the centre of the city, so the centre of the city is an island, and then the rest of the city is on the neighbouring land. So this is where the Tsars would have lived back when this was the capital and where all the administration was. And as I said, this was for a long time, the face of the empire to the rest of the world. And yeah, as I said, they have kind of pulled it off. This feels a lot more European. It doesn't have the austere, grim face that a lot of Moscow has. I mean, I like Moscow very much, but this is much more European, and I think a bit more my style. A slightly silly analogy would be Leningrad or St. Petersburg. I prefer Leningrad, whatever. I'll switch between two. Leningrad is a bit more, it's like the Melbourne to Moscow's Sydney. Sydney being, the home of financiers and a bit and because of that, a bit more austere, whereas Melbourne is a bit more fun, a bit more pleased with itself, which is the sense I have of Leningrad, even though I've only been here for less than a day. One thing I quite like about Russia is the legacy of the Soviet Union isn't always just hammers and sickles and T-34s and busts of Stalin and souvenir shops, but indeed even in flat buildings. So I'm staying in quite a European feeling kind of place, which I think must have been a Stalin key. It looked quite old. It's got a central courtyard, sort of a very old staircase, which most of the public areas in apartment buildings that are quite old smell a little bit, so they're a bit dirty, that kind of thing. But you get into the flats themselves, and they're absolutely gorgeous and well-maintained and everything. So it's just a nice little fact about life in Russia. The Mikhailovsky Dvorets. I might come back here some other day and have a look at the museum, not sure. But yeah, as I said, very much sort of an English country garden style. It's a great city parks of Western Europe. Again, this was, the European face of an empire that felt it needed to move closer to Europe. So, here we go. I think what I'll do is I'll walk a little bit more around this garden. I think I've shown you enough of it. You know what gardens look like. Go get some proper breakfast, not just that middling watermelon, and then head over to the Hermitage and show you the Winter Palace and the courtyard there. So there's an interesting story about that courtyard. So I spotted from the Mikhailovsky Gardens this memorial here, which I initially thought, given the red banners, was a war memorial, but in actual fact it's a monument to all those who died in both the revolutions, both the February and October Revolution, as well as the Civil War. So I wonder whether or not the stuff about the October Revolution and the establishment of Soviet power was added after the fall. I don't know, but yes, just an interesting, quite a nice area actually. Apparently it used to have a Soviet pantheon of heroes, but now that's gone, I think. Well, it's actually quite nice, and it's got the eternal flame in the middle, yeah. But no, just another memorial to the storied and long history of this city. So a quick wiki search has actually shown that this place is called the Field of Mars, and it used to be a cemetery for the people who died in both the revolutions and in the Civil War, but it's not been used. Burials here ended in the 30s, but apparently there's been propositions to, or rather proposals to build a car park underneath here. You know, as I said, Leningrad is a great deal smaller, but it's a great deal more compact, I think. So I have seen lots of cars and things, but people have said, no, don't do that. There are bodies and graves underneath here. So, Field of Mars. It's kind of nice. I'm on the Troitsky Bridge, one of the big bridges that they put up in the evenings to keep you from that island. Fucking bus. So this is Leningrad. See, this is how you ramble like a professional. So I was on that bridge earlier, walked across it, and then I walked around and inside that naval fortress there. I didn't film anything because I thought I'd save that for another video. Go back again and have a proper look. And went all along here, across that bridge, and then I walked through this park. Now I'm here, which, if I understood that monument correctly, was sort of a central government district of the empire back in sort of Peter the Great's time, back when the city was first built. So yeah, that's how you ramble like a professional. Go hard or go home. Leningrad, what a great town. Welcome to Vardashi, to Palace Square. Every place I come to in this country has something being put up, blocking the perfect shot. And as usual, whenever I take you on my travels, a brief history lesson. So you might recognise this square, and particularly that arch, from this painting. Now, this painting is called The Storming of the Winter Palace. The name kind of says it all. And it is not necessarily true to what actually happened. So, brief potted history. You've got the February Revolution, and then you have the October Revolution. And one of the big events of the October Revolution was the storming of this building, the Winter Palace, which, as the name suggests, was a winter residence for the Tsars when they were in St. Petersburg. Now, basically what happened was a crowd of, or rather a large group of Bolsheviks came through that archway, marched across this square, or ran, or however it was, and then faced the small number of defenders in the Winter Palace. There wasn't much resistance and eventually the defenders just sort of handed the place over, and then as things wore on, you know, the course of the revolution wore itself out, that kind of thing. So, now, after the revolution in the early 20s, it was depicted as this huge thing, much closer to how it looks in that painting. Hundreds upon thousands involved, streaming across the square and taking over this image of bourgeois dictatorship. When in actual fact, it was a lot smaller of an affair. Like, it was still a huge event, you know, it was still massive, you know, peasants and workers taking over the Winter Palace. Huge event in Russian history. 300 years of Romanov rule over. Well, I mean, that had ended back in March, but anyway. March because they used the Gregorian calendar, so it was February for them, but whatever. So it was depicted as this massive event in terms of its material scale. And yeah, but in actual fact it was a bit more prosaic, a bit more mundane. But another big thing did happen here, which sort of presaged this, which was in 1905 there was an attempted revolution, which the result was the Tsar took back power. He declared a state Duma, but one that he could dismiss whenever he felt like. So it was sort of a toothless legislature. But it started off with a group of peasants and workers, again marching through this arch, or possibly from over here, one of the other entrances to the square, and demanding some sort of reform. I don't quite remember what it was. Probably something along the lines of, you know, more bread, that kind of thing. The demands usually were quite reasonable and quite low at the beginning of these sorts of things. So they come in, and then they're confronted by the soldiers guarding the palace. Now, the Tsar wasn't at home at the time. He was in one of his other residences. I don't know where he was, but anyway, this is, dead of winter 1905, so who knows where he was. He might have been down in Moscow. Anyway, so a crowd of inexperienced, scared young men with guns are confronted by a crowd of loud, possibly jeering, I don't know, but a group of loud peasants and workers who are demanding to be let into the palace, to be demanding to see someone in charge. And one thing leads to another. The soldiers then open fire and kill quite a number of people. Now, people tried to capitalize at the same time on this, and this leads to a rather slapdash attempt at revolution, which then ultimately fails. It leads to Stalin being exiled. Lenin retreats to Switzerland, and then time wears on, and then the cause of revolution is set back for about another 10 years, and it's not until 1917 when you have the revolution in February. So that's just another little story of this square, of the Palace Square. Hey guys, it's the Winter Palace. The Tsars used to live here. Shit. It's not like seeing the Lubyanka or anything, because, obviously, as I said, my area of expertise and interest is more the Soviet era. But, shit, that's the real thing. Tsar Nicholas used to bang around in here. I don't know when this one was built, so, even so, shit. So I'm in the Hermitage, and there's a bit more history to this place that I actually didn't know. And this room here was the last meeting of the provisional government, which sort of makes sense, and then they had their last meeting in here, and the meeting next, which was the dining room, which I'll show you, they were arrested. And so, yeah, this is where the first part of the introduction of Soviet power began, in these two rooms. Shit. This is the Malachite room. Wow. And meanwhile, his people were living in huts. So this is the dining room, or possibly the antechamber to the dining room. A good thing about this place is they clearly haven't updated all the signs from the Soviet period. So in that last room, the Malachite room, they said it was the counter-revolutionary provisional government, which I liked. I thought that was funny. But yeah, let's have a look. Puts me in mind of the Hall of Mirrors in Versailles. I suppose that was the idea, really. Try and look as European as possible. This, I think, must have been a dining room. I mean, pretty huge for a dining room, of course. But if you know your Russian film history, which I wouldn't expect you to, and I've not actually seen this movie, but in 2002, a guy directed a movie called Russian Ark, where in a single shot, 96 minutes, he tours on Steadicam throughout the Hermitage. And this is one of the big rooms. Like, this would be one of the main rooms that they did stuff in. I think some of the most impressive shots are in this room, where they cleared all of this away, obviously, and everyone's in, like, so the movie is, this guy is narrating, and it takes you through, like, the history of the Hermitage. And this is one of the big sequences where, like, this room's full of people. And they all did it, one take, 96 minutes, really impressive. But I'll have a look around, show you anything interesting. So if I understood correctly, this room is the collection of Stroganov, the man of beef stroganoff fame. But clearly he travelled a lot of it's a lot of Dutch masters, that kind of thing. Lots of pastoral scenes, that kind of thing. A lot of religious stuff as well. I mean, goes with the times. That kind of thing. What else have we got here? We've got a piece called Political Manifestation in Rome in 1852. So, sort of 1848, those kind of vibes. Stroganov and all of the rest probably would have been a touch worried. But yeah, there you go. There he is. Comrade Lenin. Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, although he took the name Lenin. And he's in front of what's called Peter and Paul Fortress, which is the naval base that I walked around earlier today. Look at him. Opposite, we've got the last Tsar, Nicholas II. So, it also overloads you a little bit, doesn't it? God, it just boggles the mind. The amount of money that we've gone into this place. You know, how many people could have been taught to read using that money? Or, you know, build a sewerage system that would allow people to drink directly from the tap. You know? But it does. You know, imagine coming in, you know, you're some duke from Poland or whatever, and it tells you who's in charge, doesn't it? This is a hall. Wow. Interesting to see. Well, first of all the gold, the ubiquitous gold. Interesting to see though how, I'm not sure what exactly this is depicting, but they're trying to channel this sort of, kind of a Roman feel, you know. After the fall of Constantinople, they called Moscow the Third Rome. I mean, this is St. Petersburg, but you know what I mean. Still interesting. We're looking at a battle piece depicting Peter the Great's victory at Poltava. That's where I remembered it from. He defeated the Swedish at Poltava. Well, the Russian army did, and he's credited with it, which was one of the major battles of the Great Northern War. And the Great Northern War, I guess you could think of it as, well, I mean, Sweden was the new kid on the block. They were stretching their muscle. They were the dominant power in the Baltic and in Scandinavia. They tried to invade Russia, and they succeeded initially, and then, you know, as usually happens, these lads, so that's Peter the Great there and his retinue, ended up beating him simply by virtue of the sheer size of the place. And yeah, and then the power of Sweden was destroyed. The Russians took Finland, which they controlled until basically the revolution in 1917. And it led to the creation of what eventually became St. Petersburg. Not named for Peter the Great, named for the Apostle Peter. That's a common mistake people make. But yeah, this is just, and a lot of the images that you see of Peter the Great are these sorts of events where he just, you know, defeating the Swedish, building the navy, building St. Petersburg, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's a battle print. I mean, seen one, seen them all kind of thing, really. So this is the gallery to the Great Patriotic War, and I don't mean World War II, as you can see by the pictures, because the war against Napoleon was initially called the Great Patriotic War, and that's been since supplanted by World War II, or rather the Soviet Union's involvement in World War II. So this is just a gallery of all of the important officers that won the war against Napoleon in 1812. Well, 1814 if you want to be technical. Well, 1815 was Waterloo, but you know what I mean. So, I don't know any of these figures really. As I said, I'm more of a Soviet guy. But it's still very impressive, isn't it? Again, you can't communicate just how big and imposing this room is. You have to actually physically walk through it. It is impressive, it is really impressive. And the lad down the other end, in the black, where we started from, is Emperor Alexander I. So, there we go. And there's this cool little picture here, taken in 41, when they evacuated all of the paintings and a lot of the collection from the Hermitage just before the siege of Leningrad began. The 900 days. So, yeah. The gallery of the Great Patriotic War. The throne room. The Tsars used to sit right there. its time, used up until Tsar Nicholas II, and then apparently during the Soviet era, it was left pretty bare, and the throne was replaced with a map of the Soviet Union, which would be pretty cool to see if they still had it somewhere. You know, this huge map of the Soviet Union. Yeah. So I'm just taking a moment to sort of drink this place in. Like, wow. It's. I mean, I don't know else. I don't know how else to communicate it other than through just sort of pour and wow and ooh. It's that kind of place. You are awestruck when you walk into this kind of place. The sheer opulence of it, the sheer wealth, the power that it conveys. And then you have to sort of stop and think, you know, the suffering that meant for that meant for so many millions of people over the course of this country's history. So, yeah, there you go. There's the throne. I've been here for about 2 hours, missed basically a whole floor of their antiquities, so another reason to come back again. But yeah, pretty cool place. Very impressive. All I thought it would be. Yeah. It's been a long day, and I think it's time to wrap it up. I stopped filming after a while because it does get sort of, or you do sort of get a bit numb to the sheer opulence of the place. But yeah, it's been a good day, my first proper day in Leningrad, or St. Petersburg. But yeah, that's it. So, from the inner courtyard of the Winter Palace, there's just one thing left to say. Remember, stay dandy.